Originally, in my master's degree, I was studying industrial ecology. And it's an area which looks at resource flows that are cycled between companies, so that one company's food is another's resource. And one of the main structural difficulties in today's economy, when you think about cycling of materials, is that manufacturing is incredibly centralized. And so to be able to collect all these bits of waste and pipe it back into a centralized manufacturing system is incredibly difficult, both logistically and economically. And so I had that in the back of my mind, but I didn't have a really sharp research question at the time when I went into my PhD. So that was my background. But then looking for a PhD question, I went on what my supervisor called a fishing trip, which I went to the Biomimicry Summit in the US at the time. And I heard from Janine Benyus about 3D printing for the first time. And it was really interesting to hear about 3D printing first from a biologist, because she looked at it through the eyes of how organisms actually compose materials layer by layer and building up materials from that perspective, rather than cutting them down to, from a block of material. We often cut an object in terms of the way in which we manufacture today. And so thinking about 3D printing with that logic, I fell in love with the idea of the technology and what it could do. And then reading further, I realized that by that very logic of composition, by the very logic of making things, it enabled a more decentralized, distributed manufacturing world. And when I realized that, I had this incredible moment of what if this was the key, or a fabrication in a digital form, digitally informed fabrication like 3D printing, was the key to unlocking this structural rigidity, the structural difficulty in today's economic system with respect to cycling resources. If we can manufacture and consume at local scales, at regional scales, etc., we can actually source and cycle materials more appropriately, more effectively, as an entire economic system. And so that led to my inquiry into that, whether that was happening or not, whether materials were being sourced and cycled at local scales. And I used as a lens to look at that question the growing Fab Lab network, which is an early harbinger of this more distributed manufacturing world. And what I found was both, leading lights, but also a lot of barriers to being able to source materials at a local level. And principally the barrier was in terms of knowledge about materials within these spaces.